we are shutting down a perfectly useful asset that, by the way, we're still paying for. So this is like taking your 2023 Toyota Camry and say it's not paid for, but we're just going to junk it and I'll continue paying for it and I'll never use it. And I'm going to go buy a very temperamental Lamborghini that works sometimes and sometimes not and wouldn't really work for my family.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of PowerGab, your go-to show for all things energy and environmental policy in the state of Colorado. I'm Jake Fogleman, joined as always by my co-host Amy Cooke. And for this week's show, we want to update on sort of what's becoming a very brewing, interesting local government story, energy story. Just another chapter, honestly, in a saga that we at the Independence Institute and you personally, Amy, have been a part of for many years now. And that, of course, is the future of Pueblo, the future of Colorado's energy, as we undergo the what you like to call the forced march to 100% renewable energy, the forced closure of what has traditionally formed the backbone of Colorado's grid, being fossil fuels and coal and natural gas, fossil fuels. And it's really come to a head recently because Pueblo County, the government down there, which they've always, to be fair to them, have always been more vocal, I think, than most local governments because they have a lot to lose. But they have gotten increasingly vocal in the last week or two, explicitly issuing filings to the PUC telling them that the so-called just transition that the state is supposed to undertake in order to help communities like Pueblo that rely on coal is actually quite unjust.
Yeah, and actually, Jake, I have to say I'm having a little bit of a flashback to about 2018 when we actually originally, when I say we, the Independence Institute was, I would call it the leader of this group of what we called the Coalition of Ratepayers, and it included the Independence Institute, two recycling. You might call them junkyards, but they called themselves the original recyclers. So scrap metal yards. Then we had a home business. We had a liquor store that had refrigeration. We also had an agricultural and oil and gas developer. So we had a diverse group of members in this coalition of ratepayers, and we petitioned because that's the only way you can get involved actively in one of these proceedings is you must petition to intervene, and then the commission votes as to whether or not you should be there. And there were people who wrote when we petitioned who wrote essentially commented that we should not be allowed. So it is the playground of special interests, high-priced lawyers, and a handful of others. But it's all designed to have the sort of the theater of some kind of fair proceeding. But make no mistake, the outcome is predetermined because these groups have gotten together. I mean, they already know what they're going to do, and this one involved the closure of, I think it was Comanche, it was all of them. And particularly of interest was Comanche 3 because it had only recently come online. And what we find now is Pueblo, which by the way, I'm going to give you testimony from 3 groups. We warned everybody this was going to happen. Like, the closure, the decision to force the closure, or no, I shouldn't say force because Xcel wanted to close it. Why would Xcel want to close it? Well, because it wasn't fully paid for. They would get accelerated cost. Ratepayers still have to pay for Comanche 3, even though it's now scheduled to close by 2031, its useful life cycle goes all the way out to 2070. We must pay for that. Xcel is not. It's not free. Xcel will hold ratepayers accountable for payments on Comanche, which I think are close to $1 billion, Comanche 3. And then they get to build all new stuff. So they get to increase their rate pays. So you're going to, as ratepayers, we're going to pay for it. We will have no access to this perfectly useful asset. And the other thing is, what would it do to Pueblo? So I went back, and in 2018, there were three groups that really, sort of raised. Independence Institute was sort of the spearhead, the tip of the spear of this group. And we had an excellent attorney and an incredible expert witness. And I just want folks to know, you don't just get to intervene. Not only do you have to petition and then be granted the ability to intervene, you have to come up with a lawyer who's credible, and also expert witnesses, so that you're taken seriously as someone at the table. So all of the Colorado lawyers were conflicted out. We had to go to Texas to get a regulatory attorney, and then we had an expert witness, and all told, it was about $500,000 for us. We had to raise that money just to intervene on this proceeding. But there were three of us that agreed for different reasons, but we all raised the red flag on why we should not be closing Comanche. IBEW warned that Pueblo would lose permanent jobs, and these aren't just when I say permanent, it's not like the temporary construction jobs. I'm talking about permanent jobs, high paying. These are people that do maintenance, upkeep, or they're plant operators. They would be replaced by these short-term, lower-paying, temporary renewable construction roles. And they came out and said, essentially, don't close Comanche. Co-ops, IREA also said that closing Comanche 3 was not cheaper. And that was the other thing. Xcel kept saying it'll be cheaper to close it. And IREA said, no, it's not. And then our expert witness said, not only is it not cheaper, it's going to cost $250 to $390 million more to close Comanche than it would be to keep it open and let ratepayers pay it off and then pay for the maintenance. And one of the things here's the disappointing thing: PUC staff bought much of Xcel's numbers, which were I'm going to call them misleading at its best. What was interesting is they said if they had to build a natural gas plant down there, they would have to pay, millions of dollars of transmission costs. You know what they said wouldn't require a dollar for transmission? Their solar. Their wind and solar would not cost a dime in transmission. And the fact that the PUC staff took that on its face, it's nuts. So PUC staff endorsed Xcel's plan, which, by the way, it also tried to get through the legislature and couldn't, so it went to the PUC. So it declared that this plan was reasonable and in the public interest, and it repeated, and this is just, sorry to look up and be frustrated, but they repeated it was going to save ratepayers $213 million. And we kept saying, no, it's not. No, it's not. They ignored Pueblo job losses. Absolutely. And they treated stranded costs as, it's inevitable. You're going to kind of have those. And actually what they did is they did it in the name of, emissions only. It's that myopic view of energy policy in the state. So really, the PUC staff was Xcel's kind of their ally in this. But I do want to, and then you can get to the letter that they sent to President Trump. But I want to I want to leave, I want to close out this part of the history of what happened to get us to this point. This is from PUC Commissioner Wendy Mosier, who she voted yes for it. It was a 3-0 decision. But this is what she said. She said, Xcel is not going to pay for this. The customers of Xcel Energy will pay for retirement of these plants and will pay for the accelerated depreciation, and it will show up in rates. So don't think this is free.
Yeah,
That
and
was in her testimony.
I was going to say, and how spot on and prescient she turned out to be, because rates have continued to go up. Those costs did show up in ratepayers' bills. And, fast forward several years later, and now, all the while this was still being discussed in future clean energy plans, they call it, and currently the so-called just transition plan, all these assurances being made to Pueblo that you're going to be made whole. Don't you worry, you're going to be made whole. And finally, this past week, as of our recording this, Pueblo said, you know what, we're done with this. We're done playing games. They sent a filing to the Public Utilities Commission informing them that they had been in contact, at least some of the Pueblo Board of County Commissioners have been in contact with the Trump administration because, as they informed the PUC, they feel like the commitment to having a so-called just transition for Pueblo was not being upheld by Colorado regulators. They were not doing anything to even considering all of the recommendations that the folks down there in Pueblo had made, saying, hey, we have multiple options here where we think we can meet you halfway on emissions, but you can still make us whole. You didn't even give it a minute thought. And so now we're going to the Trump administration. We've seen that he's been willing to intervene in other states to keep necessary coal plants open for longer than their retirement dates. And now we're actively requesting that he do so in Pueblo for Comanche Unit 2, which is supposed to retire at the end of this year. And then, of course, Comanche 3, which is the unit that you mentioned was supposed to go until 2070, but under a previous settlement agreement, was due to be shuttered at the very beginning of 2031. So that's a significant escalation, I would say, in Pueblo speaking out, voicing their concerns and saying, we're not going to take it anymore.
And you know what, Jake, on this, so they have something called the PyAC report.
Yep.
So they spent months studying this issue and looking at what the economic impact of losing Comanche 3 would be to the community. Now, you just mentioned, and I said it earlier, Comanche 3 is supposed to stay open through 2070. 2070. Okay, and so 39 years ahead of time, we are shutting down a perfectly useful asset that, by the way, we're still paying for. So this is like taking your 2023 Toyota Camry and say it's not paid for, but we're just going to junk it and I'll continue paying for it and I'll never use it. And I'm going to go buy a very temperamental Lamborghini or something, or I'm going to buy a DeLorean that works sometimes and sometimes not, and wouldn't really work for my family. But so what Pueblo did, what this PyAC, which is the Pueblo Innovative Energy Solutions Advisory Committee, they studied this for 10 months. Comanche 3, this is what they said, Comanche 3 by itself generated $196 million annually in economic activity. Closing it in 2031 instead of 2070 wipes out $845 million in tax revenue. So this is Pueblo, and this is what sort of breaks my heart. Wendy Mosier knew it. She voted yes, but she knew it. And there were 3 groups that were warning the PUC that this was bad economics. By the way, you know who wasn't? Besides staff, also the office at that time, it had a different name, but it's the Consumer Utility Board. They didn't warn it. They weren't sitting there raising red flags. It took a group like the Coalition of Ratepayers and $500,000 to raise these red flags, only for us to be able to come back and say, I told you, we told you so. But the sad thing in all of this, they told Pueblo they would make them whole.
Yep.
They kept in this Office of Just Transition. It is the epitome of irony.
Yeah. Can you think of a more Orwellian name than that?
No, it's like something right out of 1984. It is, the Ministry of Truth.
Yeah.
It is, Pueblo's not going to be made whole. And frankly, the Denver Boulder, that sort of cabal that rules the state, Pueblo is just collateral damage in all of this. They don't care about Pueblo.
Which is very sad, because Pueblo is, obviously long history as a working class center of the state. You had history with the steel mill, and there's a lot of ranching down there, and it's good, hardworking people. It is a lower income area of the state. It's below median income in the state, so they really rely on these really good, high paying, high skilled jobs. And to see their concerns tossed aside, it's worth reiterating. You mentioned the PyAC report. Not only did they identify the economic impacts of Comanche 3, but they proposed, as I teased earlier, a few solutions. And I think we talked about this at the time when their recommendations came out. But one of the things they said is that the only one that would fully make them whole is doing a coal to nuclear transition. And they said, short of that, if you don't want to do nuclear, we would be willing to entertain a new natural gas facility with carbon capture. So once again, showing that they're willing to meet state regulators on their carbon goals, so long as they're willing to meet the community of Pueblo on jobs and economic activity and property taxes. And one of the biggest gripes that they have now in this current letter campaign is they say verbatim, this is a piece that we'll drop in the show notes from Sarah Blackhurst, who's with the group Action, I believe it's Action Colorado. It used to be Action 22.
Action Colorado, Action 22. It used to be Action 22, it's Action Colorado.
But she says, in verbatim, she just says, we presented all that, and she said the PUC ignored it all. They brushed aside testimony from community leaders, dismissed the PyAC report, and skipped over the hard numbers on jobs, wages, and tax base. In doing so, they didn't just fail Pueblo, they shredded the very intent of the Just Transition Plan itself. So I, once again, not mincing any words here, coming right out and swinging. And I think what really set them off too is something we teased, I believe it was our last episode we put out, is the PUC's willingness to entertain Xcel's sudden accelerated rush to capture a bunch of tax credits. And so I think this really fired up Pueblo, because you're willing to go out of your way to accommodate Xcel's push for tax goodies, to build projects that will get here before Pueblo's due to be made whole, right? Because this is all supposed to be placed in service in the 2027, 2028, et cetera, when Comanche 3 needs to be replaced in 2031, presumably. And so I think they said, you know what, the gloves are off. We're going to the federal government. You're not working with us, but you're working with the monopoly utility to make sure that they get tax goodies, but you're not willing to help us be made whole. And this is where we're at now. So I don't know exactly how the PUC is going to respond to this, but it's, I think, a big deal.
It's a huge deal. This is a huge deal to Pueblo. And I will say, I would venture to say that this is such a big deal to Pueblo that it has changed the political landscape of Pueblo.
Yeah.
Pueblo used to be a strong working class Democrat, just, these were your union folks. These
Right.
were, these are not, they're not getting rich. They're just looking for an honest day's work and put a roof over their heads, be able to take a vacation, put their, get their kids, through school, that kind of stuff. And that you have seen, and it was a Democrat stronghold for years, for decades. And that has flipped. That has flipped. And I would argue in large part because of all of this. Because what you realize is that, and Sarah, to her credit, she's not mincing words in that column.
Right.
And she said, essentially, this is, like you said, it isn't about carbon. It isn't about community. Xcel gets made whole. Pueblo does not.
Yeah.
The monopoly utility gets made whole. Pueblo, the community, does not. And it's painful. I mean, These are people who were supportive of many of those who won elected office. And it's statewide, but that has since been changed because of how they have been treated. I don't think they ever intended to make Pueblo whole. Pueblo was always going to be collateral damage.
Yeah.
They talked a good game, but they weren't about actually keeping those promises,
Yeah.
which is tragic.
It is absolutely tragic, and it's the result of deliberate policy, which makes it all the more tragic, is that this was deliberately done by the state government to lead to this outcome. I will say it is interesting now. So you now have two more units on top of, we've talked previously about Colorado Springs Utility coming out and saying, yeah, I don't think we're going to shut down Ray Nixon anymore by 2029. Now Pueblo's coming out and saying Comanche 2 and 3, yeah, we don't want to shut those down anymore. I made a prediction a few episodes back that I thought maybe Comanche 3 might get extended for, resource adequacy reasons. I didn't expect this sort of avalanche of utilities and community groups speaking out so soon. We're still 2025 here, saying, yeah, I don't think we're going to play along here, and we're going to look for any potential avenue to keep coal open longer. We think we need it for our ratepayers. We think we need it for our community. We think we need it for the grid. I think that's a fascinating story that we're going to be staying on top of here at PowerGab, of course. Something that we've, advocated for however many years, as you teased before. It makes no sense to shut down perfectly good baseload plants that are still have plenty of life in them, especially if you don't even have the projects lined up to replace them. And it will be interesting, finally, to see what the Trump administration does, because as I mentioned before, they've shown a willingness in states, I believe Michigan and a handful of other states, they've shown a willingness to intervene. I think that will be a fascinating story to watch. If they try to intervene here in Colorado, it'll undoubtedly ignite a firestorm with Colorado politicians, seeing how they're going to fight Trump on this. But it will be, I think, rich to see them do that when the community itself is coming out and saying, this is the only way we're going to be all right going forward.
And I'll just tease this a little bit. We're about to submit comments, and by the time this airs, those comments will be in, and it's to the Department of Justice, and it's just a request for information. And it's a request for information on sort of burdensome regulatory policies at the state level that harm economic competitiveness and might have an interstate commerce sort of an intersection with interstate commerce. I am going to include in those comments Comanche, because Colorado will not be able to. One is just the economic competitiveness, the reliability of the grid. The other thing is Colorado anticipates it's going to be importing power from other states.
Right.
Well, part of that is because the state is foolish enough to shut down perfectly good assets. And we've said repeatedly, the cheapest assets are the ones that you have built. It is not wind and solar. It is, I mean, that narrative, the wind and solar is cheaper, it is much like Xcel's modeling on it. They don't include transmission line costs. You don't have to you don't need any transmission lines apparently now for wind and solar. I don't know why they're building the power pathway. They don't need it. There aren't any, you don't need transmission lines for wind and solar. So the zero cost for transmission lines for whatever replaced Comanche 1, 2, and 3, but put transmission line costs into their, one of their scenarios that was natural gas, because they'd have to have transmission lines. I mean, you can't make this stuff up. And we didn't have to, because fortunately it was right in all of the testimony.
Yeah, it just goes to what we say. It's always amazing how much the monopoly utility gets away with down at the PUC when it's, as you've called it, just a club for well-moneyed, well-lawyered special interests that all know each other and eventually are very good at getting what they want in the end. But as we're coming up on time here, Amy, I'll leave it to you for some takeaways for our listeners on this ongoing saga with Pueblo.
Yeah, I'm just going to say it. We were right. and politics makes strange bedfellows. Free market think tank partnering up with labor unions, private sector labor unions, who, by the way, have more economic sense than the PUC does. I'll say that. They certainly, they know economics way better than the PUC, and that includes the staff. And I'm normally not hard on the staff because the staff does the best it can. But in this case, the staff failed, absolutely failed ratepayers in this one by going along with what Xcel said. Now, I don't know if that's pressure that comes from somewhere, but we were right on this, and Pueblo's collateral damage. So that's one. Wind and solar, still not cheaper. You can't exclude the transmission cost. You can't exclude the cost of connecting to the grid. You just can't. But they did and got away with it because it was at a time when no one was looking at it. Not enough people were paying attention to it. We were paying attention to it. Our expert witness was like, they don't include any transmission costs. And then I'm going to say this, just Xcel ratepayers, get a generator, firm your own grid. If Comanche 1 is already closed, but if 2 and 3 are eventually, if they are shut down, you're going to need a generator. So get it, firm your own grid.
Firm your own grid. That does it for us here on another episode of PowerGab. Folks like what they saw, they can head over to powergab.org to check out our entire back catalog. We produce new episodes every week. We're also available wherever you get your audio shows, whether that's Spotify or Apple. And if you'd like to reach out to us to suggest future show topics or guests you'd like to see us interview on the show, you can send those our way at info@powergab.org. We always love hearing from you guys. But until next week, we'll see you.